My sister and I were left home alone for the night because our parents were attending the graduation party of one of my brother's friends. Frankly, I was looking forward to a night of freedom, and I also happened to be closer to my sister than I was with anyone else. After they left, we watched a movie and played some games. I was only about 11 at the time, and she was 15, so my judgment varied from hers greatly. It was around 10, and both of us noticed a flashing of lights on the wall across from us. This shimmering was clearly coming from the front door, which was mostly made up of a window that allowed all light to pass through. She was a bit unsettled, but because we lived in a remote area and seldom had visitors, I had no sense of threat, since I was too young, and told her I would check it out. When I went to peer out the front door, I saw a cluster of maybe 3 cars making their way around the loop we had in front of our house. To be clear, this wasn't shared with other houses. In fact, we didn't live in a neighborhood. It was a private drive. I figured they were probably just lost, looking to turn around as the cars left abruptly. I explained the situation to my sister, and at first she was worried, but as some time passed, she seemed to shrug it off a bit. We finished watching TV, and were beginning to clean up around the house, when we heard the knob on the entrance door by the garage being fiddled with. It was a bit faint, and could have been an animal, which happened a lot, and I didn't worry about it too much, but my sister continued to grow skeptical. This struggling with the knob went on for a minute or so, accompanied by some jiggling, and started to sound like something was being stuck in the keyhole. It subsided, and then was finished with a firm pound on the door, as we heard it echo through the house. As someone who was still rather ignorant of danger, I became scared, and my sister looked at me as we were in silence. We paused for about 5 seconds out of shock, and before we could make any movements, we heard the door from our basement open and slam shut. Our basement staircase was across the house, and there was no way a single person could have covered that distance in time. Using a separate staircase, we crept upstairs with haste. Both of us ran to my sister's room, and we hid in her closet. Once in there, we got on the phone with our parents and informed them. They notified the police were informed and to stay put. In her closet, we fumbled through the dark to grab items that we could use to defend ourselves with. She grabbed her snowboard, which had a sharp metal edge on the end, and I could find nothing better than a sturdy hanger. Both of us breathing heavily, we soon noticed something outgrow the sound of our breaths. We heard footsteps resonate and increase in volume as they clearly came closer and closer to her room. Right as the steps came to a stop, we looked at each other in the eye in terror, because we knew that this person was now in the room. From under the closet, we saw light pierce through the crack as the switch was flicked. The person walked around the room and began moving stuff as we could hear from the door behind. The rummaging stopped, and the footsteps returned. They were distinctly growing much louder, and 2 shadows formed beneath the cracked light under the door, where his feet had prevented light from coming through. The noise I will never forget is when the knob on the closet door began to turn. It was met with a stiff halt as we had locked it shut. It was odd, no doors in our house had locks, but that one did, thank God. He jiggled it a bit, but gave up after a few shakes. His footsteps grew more distant and soon faded away, and after about 10 minutes, my sister and I started to feel safe and no longer heard any sounds. She explained to me that the distance from the closet to the window that allowed us on the roof was only about 5 feet. We mustered up the courage and darted for the roof. Once up there, we felt much safer, as no one would check up there. Then we waited about 15 minutes before the cops arrived. They arrived and we got back into the house, and it was as if we were returning to a completely different house. Everything had been trashed and ransacked. The aftermath left us with stolen jewellery, a mess in our house, and an experience I will never forget. We're just lucky the intruder wasn't able to break down the 1-inch wooden barrier that separated him from us, and I can't imagine what he would have done if he did. I am a 20-year-old female. I'm quite small, barely 5 foot tall, and weigh a mere 120 pounds. About a year ago, I was home alone. My sister had gone out with some friends, and my mother was working the night shift. It was about 1 a.m, and I had been watching scary story videos on YouTube, and has already gotten quite freaked out. I have 2 dogs, one big German Shepherd that we actually trained to be on her guard, and a golden retriever. We have one window facing the street, and we roll down the roller blind when it gets dark, but leave a small space open for the dogs so they can watch the street. The area isn't the best known one in town, but if you live there, people will account for you. You're one of them, and strange people tend to avoid our part. So I thought it was quite strange what happened last night. Suddenly, our shepherd started going mad, barking and running around. Since she always does this when someone walks by our house, I didn't think anything of it and continued, fueling my adrenaline rush. But after a while, even our golden retriever got uneasy, and I felt something wasn't right, but I wrote it off because I was listening to stories the whole night. Suddenly the doorbell rang, and I was about to walk towards the door and open it, as I knew my sister was supposed to be home any minute. But she always knocked on the window and would show her face in order for her to know that it was me. So I knew something wasn't right. Instead, I walked towards the window and opened the curtains, and I could make out a figure. But he had stepped in the window, so I couldn't see his face. Once he saw me, he started waving at me, and I frowned. "Can I help you?" I asked, after he hesitated before he walked towards me. "Can you open the door?" he asked. "Why? I can hear you just fine through the window," I said, and looked at him. He looked pretty familiar, but I can't exactly remember why he looked that way. I remember it was an older man. He wore an old cowboy hat and leather jacket, and jeans with holes in them. He was clean though, and wore glasses and had short grey hair and was smoking a cigar. "I'm looking for a friend of mine. They recently moved here. They have 2 kids, but I don't know where they live," he said. I looked at the clock and saw it was quite late. "Look, sir, I just recently moved here, so I don't know everyone yet. There are a lot of couples with kids. What are their names?" "I don't know." I stared at him and my eyebrows rose. "Sir, I highly doubt a couple with kids, people whose names you don't even know, want you to come knocking at their door in the middle of the night. I think it's also pretty inappropriate that you rang my doorbell. Do you have any idea how late it is?" I asked. He shrugged and asked me to open the door again. "No, I want you to leave right now," I replied, and was getting kind of panicky. I was home alone, and just wanted him gone. He left after that. I got my mum's pepper spray and was pretty freaked out, but resumed listening to my videos, and after a while had gotten thirsty. So I got up to get something to drink, and something caught my eye. He was looking at me, crouched down so he could look through the window. My eye widened, and I yelled out, "What the hell?" and walked towards him and opened the curtains. "Look, mister, I have a dog in here that will bite your ass. I'm not asking politely anymore. I want you to leave or I'll call the police." He just looked at me and smiled. I really wanted him gone now, and I was getting quite angry. I did not respond well when I was scared. When choosing between fight or flight, I always lash out and fight. My sister was due to be home any minute now, and I quickly called her, while he was just standing there looking at me, and explained what happened. After a while, I saw him walking away, and I kept looking at him until I couldn't see him any longer. Her friend was bringing her home, and she was nearly there. I was waiting by the door. I saw her stepping out of the car, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the creep. My heart dropped to my arse, and I got so angry. I saw him start to run faster towards my baby sister. I pulled open the front door and walked towards her on my bare feet, pepper spray in hand. The moment he reached for her, I sprayed him in the eyes. "I swear to God, next time I see you, just even on this street again, I will make sure you breathe the rest of your life through a straw." I was seething. Quickly, I pulled my sister inside and locked the door. I texted my mother what happened, but because she was working, she didn't see the text until morning. Maybe it wasn't wise that I sprayed or yelled at him, but at that moment, the only thing I was thinking was that he was too close to my little sister. I really hope he doesn't come this way again, for his own sake. I am a 16-year-old girl, and I live with my father most of the time. You see, I don't have the greatest of relationships with my mother. She is not a very kind person to me or my family. She judges me for everything that she can, whether that be my weight, my voice, my sexuality, or pretty much anything that she can find to mock me. It takes a big toll on my mental health, as well as my self-esteem. This is why I try and stay at my dad's house as often as I can. My dad is pretty laid back. He doesn't really care which movies I watch, what music I listen to, and which video games I choose to play. He doesn't care about who I bring home, as long as they're good to me, which is a major relief, considering that I can get away from my homophobic mum for a few days. He doesn't care if I listen to music or watch shows with swearing, because he knows it won't change me at all. We'll sit at home sometimes to watch the Saw movies for fun, to put our relationship into perspective. The point is that my dad is extremely chill about most things, which is why I'm with him most of the time. But I do plan to move in with him full time once I turn 18, or until I go to college, if I decide to, that is. As for the story, a lot of the time when I'm at my dad's house, he'll go to play poker during the evening. Sometimes, depending on how good or how intense the games are, he might not get home until 2 or 3 a.m. Most of the time I don't complain, because I can be alone for a little while, which is comforting sometimes. This was one of those nights. I usually don't go to bed until 1 a.m, regardless of whether I have school or not in the morning. This particular night, I was home alone, and I decided to take a shower around 11:30 p.m, to dry my hair and then go to bed with my dogs. This was pretty much a routine for me when my dad wasn't home. I have diagnosed panic disorder and anxiety, and am on medication for it. One of my biggest triggers for panic attacks is when the door is unlocked when I'm home alone. It scares me that I might leave the door unlocked and someone will come in and murder me or something. So because of this, I'm sure the door is locked multiple times before I get into the shower and leave my dogs in the living room. Let me explain how my apartment is laid out. When you walk through the front door, you walk through a hall that leads to the living room. In this hall is a closet and the door to my dad's bedroom. After walking through the hall, you enter the living room, and to your right is the kitchen, and straight ahead is another closet, and on the right side of the closet is my bathroom, and on the left side of the closet is my bedroom. In other words, it's a fairly small living space. Before I got into the shower, I left the kitchen light and lamp in the living room on. 2 lights lit, 3 lights unlit. I am a bit of a perfectionist, so I always leave the lights like this when I get into the shower. It's kind of a ritual I have. I don't really know how to explain it, other than it bugs me if it's set in a different way. So I set the lights the way I want them and go to take a shower. I close my bathroom door all the way and see my older dog doesn't want to come into the bathroom and pee like he usually does when I leave the door open. I take fairly long showers, usually around 45 minutes to an hour. My younger dog doesn't like people. We got her from a pet store, so it's understandable that she would be afraid, especially of men. I'm not sure what it is about men, but she just doesn't like them. She refuses to go up to them or even be in the same room as them. The only man that she will touch is my dad and sometimes my uncle, and she doesn't like strangers in general, but men, especially, give her anxiety. She also has a profound dislike of cats. We live on the first floor in our apartment building, so there will be cats walking outside on the ledge of the screened-in porch, and she will bark until she can't anymore. There is also a cup that someone left on the ledge that she dislikes and barks at constantly. About 20 minutes into my long shower, I hear her start to bark. It's not a bark that she does when she hears someone outside, but more like a terrified, threatening bark, which I had never heard before. It honestly scared me, but I assumed it was just a cat walking by or a squirrel outside a tree. I simply brushed it off as my anxiety. But a few minutes later, I noticed that the barking hadn't ceased, and my other dog had started up as well. Now, he isn't much of a barker, although when something shows up at the door, he'll let out 3 or 4 quiet, excited barks. But these weren't happy barks either. They were mean, threatening barks. This went on until I came out of the shower about half-hour later. But when the water to the shower stopped, so did the barking. I was confused, but also blew it off as my own anxiety. I wrapped my hair and body in a towel and decided to head towards the door when something caught my eye. The bathroom door was cracked open. I froze and panicked, trying to remember if I closed it all the way, which I did. I specifically remember having closed the door so my older dog didn't pee on the floor. I calmed myself enough to be able to walk out of the door, when I got an eerie feeling reaching for the doorknob. We live in a safe neighborhood, and I've never gotten this feeling before in my life. The only way to describe it was déjà vu and confusion. I opened the door and walked out to the living room. Something seemed off, but for a moment I couldn't place it. Then it hit me like a brick. All of the lights that I had left on were off, and all of the lights I had left off were on. 3 lights on, 2 lights off. Completely different than my ritual. That was the point that I realized something was wrong, or someone had been in my house. All of the candles in the living room were lit, and the lighters were placed outside on the porch with the door closed. We have always kept the lighters and candles side by side. At this point I was still in a towel and had started to weep. I was trying to figure out what to do when I remembered to check the front door. It was unlocked. At this moment, I went into full-on panic mode and had to sit down on the floor for a good 3 or 4 minutes. I texted my dad, asking him if he had remembered to lock the doors on his way out, knowing full well that I had checked it beforehand. I also left everything else out of the text, because I didn't want to freak him out. He said he had locked it, so I said okay, and decided to see if the lock was broken. It wasn't, which meant the lock had been picked. The only way for someone to get in was with a key, and since the lock wasn't broken, that meant that a key was used. The only people who have keys to our apartment are my father, my biological mother, my stepmom, and stepsisters. My mom was asleep at home. My stepmom was playing poker with my dad, and my stepsisters were almost an hour away at college. Nobody who we knew of who had a key had been there other than me. None of our stuff was stolen, which confused me, because if someone is to break into a house, why would they switch the lights on or off, light the candles, and not steal a damn thing? I didn't get any sleep that night, and I haven't told my dad about what happened. I have no idea why my bathroom was open, or why the lights were switched on and the others off, as well as why the candles were lit. I just assume that when that person heard me in the shower, maybe they wanted a peek, or I don't know, maybe they got scared and left, but obviously not before wanting to mess with me. All that I know is that whoever broke into my home had a key, which means they can come and go as they please, and that scares the shit out of me. I live in a pretty nice, upper middle class neighborhood. There is also very little crime in my town, although there have been quite a few robberies in my neighborhood. I was in 4th or 5th grade, so around 10 years old, and I am a petite little girl. My parents were out, I don't remember where, probably a movie or a friend's house, but I didn't mind. I was at an age where being home alone was exciting and new. My mom had left me in the family room with snacks and the TV remote in order to help keep me occupied. Around 10 o'clock, I heard the doorbell ring. My parents had taught me never to answer the door when they weren't home, so I did exactly that. It made me a little uneasy, but I chose to assume it was just a solicitor, and that if I ignored it, they would be on their way. A few moments later it rang again, and starting to feel a little more spooked, I tiptoed to the kitchen. In fear of them hearing me, I grabbed the home phone. I snuck back into the TV room and took my seat back on the couch, with the security of the phone in my hand. That's when the knocking began again. With that, I became more scared, as this person seemed intent on somebody answering the door. My logical side tried to rationalize over my fear and assumed my parents came home early and had forgotten their house keys. Still having fear in the back of my mind though, I didn't answer the door, but instead called my mother to ask her if it was her knocking. The phone rang and was sent to voicemail. I became a little more nervous, but told myself that I was a big kid now, and I had to be brave. I couldn't let every little thing scare me. That was until the pounding began. With the first bang, all my 10-year-old bravery melted away. I immediately ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and took cover behind my fortress, the couch, with my weapon and the phone. The banging only seemed to get louder as I continually called my mum. She finally picked up and told me that she was busy and to stop bothering her. I told her someone was at the door, and she said I was just being paranoid. With this, I thought maybe I was being paranoid, and this added to my reasoning to not call the police. If my own mother didn't believe me, then why would they? I was also scared that if they did come, the person banging would have already gone, and I would be called a liar, along with my parents getting in trouble for leaving me alone. And I came out after what seemed to be about half-hour of hiding, just in case the ordeal truly wasn't over. It wasn't until I was 15 that I brought up this occurrence again, and my dad shared with me the most disturbing news I'd ever heard. The night after what I was told was just paranoia and lies, my dad did go out to investigate around the house and found a dent, dirt, and other damage around the handle and lock, which is the area that is kicked when breaking a door open. I do remember us getting a new front door when I was 10, but I never did connect the two experiences. I can't believe, one, that my parents would make me think I'm crazy like that, but two, that someone actually tried to break into my house. It still gives me chills thinking about it, and what would have happened to me if the intruder did end up getting in. I am a 25-year-old female, and I suffer from really severe anxiety, as well as panic attacks on the regular. I have been through a few scary experiences that have caused my anxiety to flare up, but recently, it's been really bad. When I was in middle school, I was walking home from my bus stop when I see a neighbor outside, ushering me into her house. Trusting her, as I was friends with her children, I went in. As I started to walk into her house, I looked over at mine and saw some arsehole taking my bike and riding off with it. I looked at her, and she told me she heard noises coming from my house and saw no one was home, so she called, but no one answered. My mum was at work and my brother was at detention, so it was just me coming home. She called my mum, and she came home with the cops. The house was completely destroyed. All of my mother's jewellery gone, my laptop taken, my brother's game console gone, and the cops asked if I could identify the individual. But I didn't realise what was happening at the time. I was almost in my driveway before my neighbour rushed over to me. I was 10 seconds away from walking into a home invasion. And that haunted me for a long time. That is just the first story though. And it is why I have such a big fear of being home alone. See, my boyfriend is in another state right now because his grandfather passed away. I stayed home because we have a few pets and I couldn't get the time off work. When I'm alone, I get very spooked at every noise. And it also doesn't help that I have a cat, and cats being cats are interested in every squirrel that is outside. So, when she'd run to the window, I would follow her, just to see what she was going after. When I was a sophomore in high school, there were people breaking into houses around the town I lived in. The town I lived in was full of old money, or as my grandfather called them, soup eaters, because they'd spend so much money on making their appearance look good, they must not be able to eat. Anyway, I wasn't too worried about the break-ins, because it was on the rich part of town, not mine. This was also a very safe town, about an hour south of Boston, and no newsworthy crimes at all. Actually, the worst crime before the break-ins were always just some teenagers being caught with weed. I was alone at night with my then boyfriend. We were watching TV in the living room, which was in the back of my house, so I couldn't see who pulled into the driveway or who even came to the house. I could hear the door when it would open, and that's how I knew someone was home. I specifically remember we were watching The 40-Year-Old Virgin, because that's one of my favourite movies. Outside of the living room window, we had some bushes that grew very thick and tall during the summer, and I remember I heard one of them scratch the window screen, but figured it was just the wind, and resumed my movie. We had the blinds closed, since it was dark outside and I never liked having them open, with the fear that I was being watched. Then I hear someone walking up my porch on the front door. Thinking it was just my mom and her boyfriend coming back from their date, I didn't pay much attention to it, until I noticed no one had come inside yet. Then we hear the doorknob start to turn very slowly. My then boyfriend muted the movie, while we stared at each other, not really sure what we were hearing. We then hear another pair of footsteps coming up the porch and slight whispers, but we couldn't make out what they were saying. I then decided I would go and check it out, since he seemed to be paralyzed by fear and would be useless in situations such as this. I felt like I was now home alone. To get the door, you have to go through the kitchen, which is attached to the front door. I had all the lights off and very slowly and quietly went into the kitchen to peek out of one of the windows. I then saw two males at my front door, trying to pick the lock to get into my house. I quickly grabbed a steak knife and crouched down behind the kitchen table. There was a sliding door behind me, with no curtain though, since our new kitten had clawed it down and absolutely destroyed it. So it was not a very good place to hide, since all you'd have to do is walk up the stairs to our back porch and see right into the kitchen, half the house, and me with my back turned. I could still hear the whispers, and then I heard one of the men walk off the front porch. I slowly started to stand up and go over to the front door when I heard someone walking up my back porch, trying to get into the sliding glass door. I was stuck. There was no way I was getting out of this without being seen. My then boyfriend was just looking at me with fear from the living room. No help at all. I quickly texted my mother and her boyfriend in a group chat, saying that there were two men trying to get into the house. She told me to go upstairs and into her bedroom and to lock the door. She said they were calling the cops and that they'd be there soon. I tried my hardest to be courageous, to get out of my hiding spot, get the useless moron of a boyfriend and run up the stairs. But I got angry. For some reason I wasn't scared anymore. I was just incredibly pissed off. To this day I don't know what came over me. These people were trying to break into my house, where I had always felt safe. I know that no one was going to protect me, and I was going to have to do it on my own. I stood from my hiding spot, turned on all the lights in the kitchen, and when I saw one of the men opening up the glass sliding door, I guess it was never locked, I looked over to him with my knife in hand and said, "Get out of my house, or I will slit your throat." Then he bolted down the stairs, and I went to my front door, and saw the man who was trying to break into the front start running with his friend out of the driveway. Next thing I know, I see my mum's car, my mum's boyfriend's car, and the police speeding into the driveway, and I was outside holding a huge kitchen knife. The cops opened their doors and told us to get inside and that they would check the surrounding areas. We went inside, and all my mum's boyfriend would say is, "You're as white as a ghost. What happened, honey?" My mum was in tears hugging me, and I was in a state of total shock. The cops came into our house, and sadly, they didn't find the men who'd done this. But they did have one of their footprints from the back door, since he had been foolish enough to step inside the mud. The lock to my front door was damaged, and he almost made it inside. I didn't realize what came over me, nor did I realize what I even said until the police were taking my statement, and that's when the fear came back. I was no longer angry. I was horrified. I started crying hysterically, only just taking in what had happened. They never caught the two men, but from what I know, there were no more break-ins in my neighborhood. Before I moved in with my now boyfriend, my mum, who would work overnight at the hospital, and my brother, who would work nights at a retailer, would always ask me if I was okay staying home alone. I moved out when I was 23, and I always said, "Yeah, Mum, don't worry, I'll be fine." But if I am alone, I still sleep with all the lights on and a steak knife under my pillow. Two break-ins that I was there for have honestly traumatized me. I was around 8 years old when this happened, and my sister was 12. We lived in a tiny little house we called the shack, that our mom moved us into after she split up with our father. In all fairness, it was all that we could afford. My sister and I shared a tiny bedroom, but one perk about the house was the huge backyard and large above-ground pool and deck we would always play on. We had a big privacy fence, and being the nosy little kid I was, I liked to climb on some of the wooden boards of the fence and check out the neighbors. I recognized the two little boys who lived in the house kitty corner to us because they went to school. I made it a habit every day to climb up my side of the fence and hang around and talk with them. But I never climbed over the fence, just climbed a plank so I was high enough to peer over and to talk. They had an uncle named Randy, who was probably in his mid-20s and 30s, and was usually in the backyard at the time, just doing housework or so. And I got to know him as well, and he was usually in the backyard, doing housework. So I got to know him, as well as both me and my sister would hang on the fence and chat with him most days. The conversations were always innocent, and he seemed like a nice guy. But now, looking back, I can see some red flags with him. I remember one time he had a basketball, and accidentally threw it over our fence. We offered to grab it for him, but he insisted that he could get it himself, and hopped over the fence with ease. We thought nothing of it at the time, but I imagine it was to test out how easy or how fast he could scale the fence. One day, in passing, my sister mentioned to him that our mum worked the night shift, and therefore it was always just the two of us home alone at night. Well, that was all he needed to hear, because shortly after, this happened. I woke up one night to the sound of my sister crying. We shared a bunk bed, me on the bottom, and when I stood up, she was out of bed leaning against the wall on the phone, crying. I asked her what was wrong, but she assured me everything was fine and to go back to sleep. So I did. It wasn't until the next day that I learnt what really happened. Apparently, in the middle of the night, while Mom had been at work, Randy jumped the fence and tried to break in. He started banging on our bedroom window, demanding that my sister let him in. She refused, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. So he started walking around the entire house, banging on windows and yelling for her to let him in, trying all the doors. That's when she got out of bed and called 911, and when I woke up. And yes, I too have no idea how I managed to sleep through all of that commotion. Because she kept telling me that he was banging on our window, right by the bed, very loudly. But in my case, when I was asleep, I may as well have been dead. Of course, by the time the cops arrived, all he had to do was jump the fence in 10 seconds, and he was back in his own yard. They knocked on his door, and he denied that he had done anything. So the police said that there was nothing he could do, because he wasn't about to admit perving on some little girls and trying to break in. We were shaken by the incident, of course, and my mum wasn't able to change her work schedule, so she started having us stay at Dad's the nights that she had to work. A few years passed without incident, and we just assumed that everything was fine. I had long stopped talking to the boys next door, and then it happened again. And guess who slept through the entire thing again? It was me. My sister was a couple years older now. We had a sliding glass door to the backyard near where they were all sitting. The door had typical vertical blinds, except weeks earlier, one of them had broken, and we couldn't get it back to stay no matter what. So there was a gap in between the blinds where the broken one was gone. Anyway, the girls were all sitting around the couch playing board games, when one of my sister's friends suddenly turns rigid and said, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy standing at your glass door." They all turn around and it was Randy again, his face pressed up against the glass where the gap in the blinds was, just watching them. Naturally, everyone freaked out and called 911, and just like that, he jumped the fence and the cops couldn't verify anything, even though they described what he was wearing, and he answered the door in the same outfit when the police questioned him. That was the last straw, so we moved out of the house and received a restraining order against him. He didn't show up to court, so the judge automatically granted us the order, and we never saw him again. Last I checked, and I looked him up online, he's in prison for a bunch of random charges. My mother works the night shift, and I tend to stay home alone. This was one of those nights. Like every other night, I was at home by myself. It was quite late in the evening, but not so late that if someone were to arrive, I wouldn't consider opening the door still. That being said, what happened next was very unexpected, and certainly very freaky. Now, just so that you are aware, we live in a split-level house. Me and my mother have the top part, and my landlord has the bottom part. There is also a basement, but it is mostly used as storage for the landlord, and we have only been down there once when he was giving us a tour of his personal space. But that's besides the point. I was home alone, and I was just chilling, playing RuneScape on my laptop. Just kind of minding my own business and not worrying, as I was by myself. I am a petite female of 15, and my mother was programmed to come home in about 5 hours, so I probably wasn't going to go to bed for a while. My landlord had told me earlier that day that he was expecting a visitor, and that if we heard the door, to not worry, that he would get it as it was his friend. So I was cool with that. Just as I'm playing my game, I hear something in the hallway. There's a creak outside my door. That's odd, I thought. Why is his friend coming up the stairs coming into our hallway? I was a bit freaked out and thought for a moment, could it be my mum finishing early? She usually called me if that was the case. Maybe she was going to surprise me. In my head, I couldn't rationalize anything other than my mother coming home early and her trying to surprise me. So, excitedly, albeit with a tint of reluctance, I slowly inched towards the door and creaked it open. Standing there, in the hallway, was a dirty, disheveled-looking man. At the first glance of him, I was quite freaked out, not really knowing what to do. Then he started to scream, and I was really taken aback. The scream really caught me off guard, and my landlord from downstairs quickly opened his door and looked up to see the man. I then closed my door pretty quickly, and the landlord went inside and grabbed his gun. He told the man to get lost, or that he was going to call the cops. So the man did. He told him that if he didn't leave now, he was going to call the cops. But the man didn't move, and from my peephole I could just see him staring at my door, almost as if he were looking straight through me, at me. I was getting pretty freaked by this, but glad I had the protection of the door. Turned out, the man was living in our basement and had been doing so for some while. I don't know what caused him to want to come upstairs. I think he must have learnt our patterns, figured out that I was home alone, and God knows what he wanted to do to me. I'm glad that he never returned though, and that the police were able to take him away shortly after. We decided to move out of that building quick smart after this. I think it was because the landlord never really closed his back door, which opened into the garden, which could have easily been vaulted by a simple jump. Someone could have snuck in, gone downstairs into the basement, and hidden there, which evidently is what happened, as they found evidence of him living there for a while. Anyway, I'm glad that I will never have to meet him again. My husband Ted is in the military. We have generally lived on base every station we have been to, because the surrounding towns can be very crime-ridden and sketchy, and with my husband gone most of the time, the extra security is appreciated. I work from home due to us moving so often. So one afternoon I was taking a break. I had made a bite to eat and was snuggling on the couch with my dog. That's when I heard the sliding glass door open. It was so nonchalant that I thought it was Ted. I saw my cat run from the kitchen and a shadow standing near the door entering it. I thought maybe he had come back for something, so I called out for him like he had just come home. "What are you doing home? Did you forget something?" There was no answer. This is where I got a very eerie feeling. After I just asked what he was doing, I saw the shadow move and heard the click of the sliding glass door lock. From there, he walked to the laundry room and shut the door. I still had received no response. So I'm sitting on the couch scared out of my mind, and I call my husband, hoping to hear his phone in the laundry room. I don't hear the rings, but he answers. I asked him why he came home and he didn't answer, and he says, "That wasn't me. Grab the dog and get into the car." I freak, and after getting on the phone with Ted, I grab the dog and run for the car. From there I call the military police. Waiting for them was probably the longest 20 minutes of my life. When they got there, they cleared the house and found no one. They asked me to make a statement, and they were even baffled that someone would try this on a base. We still live here, and I'm so scared that he will come back. This was several years ago, when I was about 12. I lived on a street with a few houses that were far apart, and the area was densely wooded. It all started when I stayed home from school because I didn't feel good and my parents both worked, so I was home from about 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. I'd been home alone a lot before, so I was comfortable and I knew how to handle myself. Around 1 p.m, I heard a knock at the door. I was sick and lazy, so I ignored it. I also knew it wasn't wise for a young girl that was home alone to answer the door to a stranger. It knocked again, so I looked out of my bedroom window, and it was a man standing there, peering into the small window next to the door. His truck was parked on our driveway, and I recognized it as the exterminator. I didn't recall my mum saying he was coming, so I just decided to wait until he left. I go downstairs to get water when I see him roaming around my deck, looking into all the windows. I knew he was just checking if people were home, but it freaked me out. I was trying not to be seen, so I slithered into the next room, hoping that I hadn't been seen. After about 5 minutes, I sneak into the living room and see if the truck is still there. Yep. Our living room has a glass door that leads into the sunroom that's connected to the deck. I turn around, still kind of paranoid that he was going to see me, and he's in the sunroom. He was an older man, and God, he had some bad eyesight. I was crouched behind the coffee table, and he caught sight of my cat's Scooter. He made a face at her, and she hissed and growled. That's when I hopped up to tell him he couldn't be there. I made my way to the door and opened it, and he said, hi, you're Emma, right?" My face went white. How the hell did he know that? Yeah, I said. "How do you know me?" "Oh, I know your parents. Can I come in and inspect?" I stupidly said that they were at work, and I still was incredibly weirded out that a stranger who I'd never seen before come to my house knew my name. He looked me up and down and said, "I'll come back another time then." All I wanted was for the creep to leave. I shut and locked the door and made my way to my room. He goes back and gets into his truck. He sits there for a good 2 minutes as I watched him from my window trying not to be seen, and he finally leaves. I called my mum and asked her if she was expecting the exterminator, and she said no. I hung up really confused, but I calmed myself down and didn't want to scare myself. When my mum comes home, I tell her everything. The fact he knew my name and was looking through windows. She looked concerned and said she had never called him to our house or anything. When I explained his appearance, She said she vaguely remembered him inspecting our house prior, but not that he knew my parents, let alone my name. Luckily, though, he never came back for his second round. This happened about 4 years ago, when I was 16. My parents had just divorced, and my mum and I had moved into a flat with my mum's new boyfriend. It was a really modern place in a good area, so there was no reason to worry. This one evening, my parents decide to pop off to the store, and I'm going to stay at home for about half an hour to an hour. They leave, and I go on about cooking some food. After about 5 minutes, there's a knock at the door. Of course I assume it's my parents, but I look through the peephole just to be sure. But no, it's a middle-aged man I'd never seen before. So I just assume it's a kind of door-to-door salesman, and decide not to open it as I can't be bothered. But he keeps knocking and knocking, harder and more intensely. He goes on for a few minutes and then stops, and then he starts trying with the door handle quite furiously, jamming it up and down. This isn't some confused old man who got the wrong door. That was quite clear already. At this point I'm terrified, and in lack of anything else, I go and sit under the kitchen table. I don't have my phone on me, and he keeps jamming the door handle, and now he's starting to have a go at the mailbox. I can hear how he opens and closes it, and the final straw comes when he starts fiddling with the keyhole. I can hear him sticking something in there and trying to turn around, when he gives up and sticks with the letterbox. After what feels like an eternity, I am absolutely paralyzed at this point with fear, and everything goes silent, and eventually I figured that he left. This went on for about 15 minutes, and I was still sitting in the exact same spot for God knows how long, scared to tears. Since then, strangers knocking on my door is one of my biggest paranoias, and I hope it doesn't happen again, for my own sanity.